Welcome to The Spotlight, the podcast where veterans and military spouses connect and share how their military experience has transformed their lives and their businesses. Here's your host, Bob Louthen.
Hey, this is your host, Bob Louthen, founder of the Veteran Crowd Network, the network that brings veterans and veteran-led businesses together with each other and the resources they need to prosper. And you are tuning into The Spotlight. And now a word about a Veteran Crowd Spotlight partner, Fund the First. Fund the First is the nation's leading crowdfunding platform for first responders, military, and medical professionals. Thanks to a partnership with ID.me, Fund the First is able to combat fraud and scams to ensure donors that money is going to a verified and trusted source. Visit fundthefirst.com for more details. Fund the First. Crowdfunding for our nation's heroes.
Welcome, everybody. This is Bob Louthen, the host of the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. Pleased to have my guest today, Barker Squire, a 2010 graduate of my alma mater, the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington, Virginia. He was a United States Marine Corps officer, a graduate of the Darden School at the University of Virginia in 2017, and now has acquired a business and is the owner of Craneworks, Inc. in Pamplin, Virginia. And I lived in Virginia all my life and even had to ask, but Pamplin, Virginia is not far from Appomattox. So Barker
right.
Squire, welcome to the program. Thanks for stepping into the spotlight.
Yeah, thanks again for having me today.
Hey, Barker, let's start. Tell everybody about what Craneworks does. And, this is a new gig for you. When you and I first sort of connected, you were hunting for a business and then you found it. So tell everybody what you're doing now with Craneworks.
Sure. So we're primarily inspect and repair what are called overhead cranes. And if you ever been in a warehouse type environment before and seen something rolling back and forth on tracks, chances are that was an overhead crane. And that's our core business. We serve all branches of the military, tend to focus somewhat on Navy and Marine installations here in the Mid-Atlantic. And we also do some work on mobile cranes and portal cranes up and down the East Coast. So we're a small business, but we certainly punch above our weight, and we've got a great team here.
Hey, Barker, did you ever in your wildest dreams, I don't know, in college think you'd own a business or, and more specifically, be working with overhead cranes? Was that a vision of yours 15 years ago?
I certainly didn't have a vision of overhead cranes in particular. I'd say in the period of years that you mentioned, I was more thinking like along the lines of having a long career in the military. Having a shorter one by my own choice. It was an incredible one, and it's really prepared me for this experience. So I can't say that from a young age I've always had a passion for leading people and organizations. That was true of my time in the Marine Corps, and that was really a key thing that pushed me in the direction to ultimately find a small business to lead.
Where did you grow up?
Grew up in Emporia, Virginia, which is
NASCAR
right on
country.
95. That's exactly right. Right on 95, about 10 miles from the Carolina border.
Yeah. How'd you end up choosing VMI? Was it, were you thinking about going into the Marine Corps that early, or?
So I'd been interested in the military from a very young age. I think some of that was from my grandfather serving in World War II, like many grandfathers did.
Mm-hmm.
Was in the Boy Scouts, loved being outdoors. And as I matured a little bit in my high school years, I took on more kind of leadership opportunities, and those things just kind of came together to really clearly point me toward service in the military for at least some point in time. I knew I wanted to do something bigger than myself, and the military was the clearest path for me. And knowing that, I decided to focus my college search on institutions that had great ROTC programs, and came on the post at VMI and just fell in love with the place, and was thrilled to to end up there and have a great 4-year experience there.
Was your grandfather Marine?
He served in the Navy, aboard a LST in the Pacific. So
Okay.
yeah,
All right. All right.
a
Interesting.
little rogue, I guess.
Talk a little bit about your Marine Corps experience, but we're really going to dive into business here real quick. We got a lot of
Mhm.
veterans on our network that very interested about your experience. But real quick about what you did in the Marine Corps and a little bit about that as a learning experience. It did kind of set the foundation for what you're doing now, I think.
It certainly did. So I served, as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps. Did my normal training up in the Quantico area for about a year and was stationed down at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. So, day one down there was placed in charge of a platoon of about 40 Marines. We did 10-month or so work up and ultimately deployed to Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan was immediately given another 60 Marines and some sailors and civilians too to take care of. So was in charge of roughly 100-person base.
What part of Afghanistan were you in?
Southwest, which is where the Marines were camped out at that time. This was in the 2011, 12 kind of time frame. So it was essentially in charge of a small portion of the country and what you could view as a small city, about 100 people. And that was the most formative experience I'd had, that point in time in my life, and probably still is. I was a 20-some-year-old lieutenant at the time, given an incredible amount of responsibility to really represent our nation overseas in a great way and to accomplish our mission, which at that time was to hand over the full responsibility of security to the Afghan National Security Forces. I thought it was totally normal at the time, but looking back on it, wow, what an incredible, informative experience that was. So did a 7-month deployment over there, ended up commanding that one base. It was called Cop Wrinkle for 4 months, and then commanded a slightly larger base for the final few months of our deployment. I came back, did another workup with a different battalion, and served as executive officer. And my final role, kind of on my way out the Marine Corps, was as company commander for a headquarters and service company, and in charge of roughly 200 Marines, lots of vehicles and equipment. And that was a great kind of final role for me to be in as I was thinking about, hey, what I'm going to do next.
Right. And so you launch your business career, you go back and get your MBA. Darden's a yellow ribbon school, real emphasis on bringing a lot of veterans into the school and into the program. When did you just decide you thought you would want to buy a business, though? Let's get into the nuts and bolts of that.
Sure. So made the tough decision to get out of the Marine Corps. And at that time, I already had my targets set on the business community. I took a brief look at, hey, what else could I do out there? I could go to law school. I could go be a doctor. I could go serve in the civilian capacity in some way, but saw really business as a way to leverage my skills and passions and leading other people and organizations. So that's what ultimately led me to business school. And I thought that I would start a business out of school, come up with that next big idea and startup kind of thing. And I did kick around a few interesting ideas during my first year at Darden, but ultimately didn't come up with the one idea that I felt was right for me personally and my skill set, or that the timing was right for. Had a great internship with a Fortune 500 company between my first and second years, and really learned that, hey, nobody's got it completely figured out. I think I can still do this entrepreneurship thing. And fortunately, while I was at Darden, I was exposed to this concept of entrepreneurship through acquisition, or essentially finding someone else's legacy and what they've built and carrying it on to the future. So that's how I kind of came across the concept. It was new to me at the time, but it really does happen every day, and it's important for it to happen in order to keep the small businesses, the backbone of America, moving into the future.
Yeah, there really are two paths to being a business owner: is buying one or starting one, right? And so you
That's right.
chose to buy one. So let's talk a little bit about that initial journey. Okay. The first day you decided, I'm going to buy a business. Now, how much did you know, and where did you go? I mean, did you have a
Yeah.
mentor or somebody that kind of taught you this? I mean, or
Had
were you learning as you went?
a little bit of everything. So certainly had lots of mentors. When I initially made the decision, I talked to as many people as I could who had navigated the process or had been a part of the process in some way. So folks who had bought a business successfully, folks who tried to and for whatever reason didn't work out, folks who had sold their business to someone else, investors, lenders, bankers, you name it. I was just really trying to learn as much as I possibly could about the process, because it is most people never or only sell their business once. It is and most people only buy a business once. It happens all the time, but for individuals it usually only happens once or twice
I mean,
in a lifetime. Yeah,
outside of their home, but potentially, hopefully, it's
right.
It's a bigger asset for them, right?
That's right. That's right.
And it's often their baby. We'll come back to
Should be. Yeah.
that one. It's a very emotional thing. How long did
Mhm.
it take you from sort of when you started the search to when you bought what now became Craneworks?
It took a year and a half from start to finish, and I stay in touch with other people who have done and are doing this sort of thing, and it really does take anywhere from a year to 2, sometimes 3 years if you're really trying to go about this in a
How many
disciplined
companies did
way.
you look at? I mean, you
Thousands,
kissed a lot of frogs. How many?
thousands. Yep,
Thousands. Okay, so
yep.
what was your screening process? I mean, you didn't look at all of them that in that depth, right?
Sure,
So
that's right.
what was the sort of the triage methodology?
Yeah, so certainly had a pretty systematic process for looking at businesses, but the top several qualities that I looked for in a business were: does it have a recurring revenue, or does it have revenue that you can kind of count on year after year? Repeat customers is another way to say that. What are the margins? Are they is it kind of just squeaking by like a grocery chain, 1 or 2%, or is it really a reasonable margin in the 10, 15, 20% kind of range? And the last thing that I was looking for was just size of the business. And for me, that was Ebitda, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Yeah, I found looking for businesses is if they're super small, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, they tend to be very, very reliant on the owner or the founder of the business. And as they get a little bit larger, there tends to be a few more managers and systems and stuff in place that can help keep that business going after the founder and owner departs to do kind of whatever's next for them. So
So you mentioned something in there. You mentioned EBITDA, and
mhm,
that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization.
that's right.
EBITDA is the great equalizer among businesses. It's every business has an EBITDA, right?
Mhm,
And every business has a price, a value, right?
yep,
But people pay buy businesses often on a multiple of that EBITDA,
that's right.
right?
Mhm,
That's a way of comparing, I don't know, a hairdressing business against a overhead crane business.
that's
How
right.
much EBITDA can I buy for $1, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so, but EBITDA is kind of a funny number, isn't it?
It's different,
The
if you look
seller's
on your
Ebitda and yours might
P&L.
not be the same, right?
That's true. Yeah, there's different ways to interpret it, and oftentimes it's adjusted. Yeah, I certainly talked to plenty of business owners who said, "Well, I know the number, it says it's this, but if we could, I've really been funneling a few things through my business, and it really should be higher." And that's you ultimately could get to an adjusted EBITDA kind of number, and ultimately what a buyer needs to be able to get to is um, a reasonably adjusted EBITDA number.
Right. It's the ability of the business to pay back the capital,
Yes, that's right.
That's what it
Regardless of where
is.
it's coming from, whether it's debt or equity, someone who's buying a business is really interested in the future.
Yeah. So, so what resources did you use to identify the thousands of businesses that you first saw? Did you go to business brokers? Were there listings? How much cold calling did you do? I mean, did you just pick people out of the phone book too, right?
It pretty much did everything. And over time, I did track what worked and what didn't work. Um, I'd had three broad channels for sourcing uh, potential, opportunities. One was proprietary in nature, which that's cold calling and cold emailing people completely out of the blue, saying, "Hey, here's who I am. I'm a veteran. Um, I'm interested in finding a small business to kind of carry on into the future." And that did generate some leads, some great conversations. About 40% of the leads, the companies I looked at over that
Hmm.
year and a half period kind of came from that proprietary channel. The next productive channel was brokers and investment bankers, people who essentially act as real estate agents for businesses
Right.
all the time. So what they do day in and day out. Um, and there's some pros and cons working through that channel, but again, about 40%
Where
of the
we're
leads came from
shopping the
them.
deal, we're looking for the
Mhm.
highest payment, right? Whereas the
Sure. Yep.
proprietary stuff that you list, you might not be competing, if you will. Was Craneworks, which category did Craneworks fall into ultimately?
Craneworks was represented by a broker.
Okay. All
Mhm.
right. And, I mean, it's like I say, the good thing about a broker is when a seller has hired someone to represent them, they're seriously engaged in
Yeah,
selling the business. Hopefully they're getting good advice, right? How how realistic were sellers about the valuations of their businesses? Let me ask that question. We'll go back to EBITDA
sure.
and so forth, but I often find that the seller's impression of valuation and the buyers are not aligned.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and that's why I mentioned with the kind of broker route, there really are pros to it as well, because a broker, whether a small business broker or an investment banker, can help a seller um, just be a little bit more realistic in terms of what the market is willing to pay. So whereas with the proprietary search, me cold calling somebody out of the blue, they're like, "Man, I bought this stock yesterday, and its price to earnings multiple is like 20 times, and so I think you should pay me 20 times EBITDA," and that's just um, not realistic at all. And it all comes down, to risk and certainty in the future. And as an owner who's in the business every day, knows in and out, you've got a lot of certainty in the future, even maybe if it's being run by somebody else. But a buyer or third party or somebody coming in from the outside, they can't have that same perspective unless you paint it to them in a really believable and true way. And so you get this kind of mismatch where buyers like, "Yeah, this thing is, worth millions and millions of dollars," and a buyer's like, "No, I've looked at 20 companies that like exactly like this, and generally they sell in the 4 to 5 times EBITDA kind of range."
Right.
Yeah.
So you were seeking solid businesses with
Mhm.
predictable recurring cash flow, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And you were buying a business, but at some point you sort of had to put your selling hat on, in the sense that
Mhm.
a buyer doesn't want to sell their business to just anybody. To talk about talk about the psychology of the buyer when it comes to actually choosing their seller outside of how much of a check you're going to stroke.
Sure. Yeah. So what makes ultimately someone be comfortable with selling their business to a particular buyer? And I do think fit is very important. Um, for my situation specifically, there was a lot of great overlaps. So I'm from very close to where our business is
Hmm.
headquartered. I served and trained on a lot of the bases that we serve as a business
Hmm.
today. And I think that the biggest thing, which can be applicable regardless of your background, is like I'm coming into this thing is not as a purely financial kind of buyer, but hey, I'm going to make this my life and really invest my heart and soul and life savings into it. Take care of employees and customers, and take care of your legacy. So uh, the short answer is for each seller, it does vary. Some people really are just interested in, hey, who's going to pay me the most? But what I found is that most sellers are interested in taking care of their legacy, and that's part of the equation. Like, yes, it's how much is someone going to pay me for my business, but it's also like who's the right person or group to take care of my legacy and employees and keep this thing going well into the future.
It's their baby. Did you
Yeah,
run into any businesses where there was sort of the nepotism issue that there's a family member that didn't want to take over the business, but has a nice job at the company, that sort of thing? Did you see any of that?
there's definitely there's those situations out there, particularly in small businesses. Um, you it's most small businesses are started by somebody who's good at what they do, wants a little bit more freedom, and they get to a certain point and they need to hire somebody, and they want to hire somebody they trust, and oftentimes that's a family member. So that's something to be aware of, whether you're interested in buying a business or selling a business. It can complicate things when you mix family and business. So, not an uncommon situation. Yeah.
uh, let me now, let's talk a little bit about process. Okay, so you created probably more than one letter of intent, some of which you got turned down, I'm sure.
Yep.
But talk about how you approached a letter of intent and sort of what you were sort of proposing when you identified a business that I think I want to buy this.
Sure. So uh, a letter of intent, for folks who aren't familiar, is really the first formal offer between a buyer and a seller, and it's in a written form. There's usually a few standard things in there, such as a purchase price, and um, if the buyer wants the seller to finance any portion of the transaction. Um, there's also components in there around what's called due diligence. So after a letter of intent is signed, generally sellers kind of open their doors, open their financial books, and let buyers come in, look under the hood of the business, so to speak. And it's important for not only the financial terms to be spelled out in a letter of intent, but also what kind of access is going to be afforded in the buyer before a transaction is finalized. Um, there's usually a period of time as well where the potential buyer has some exclusivity
Right.
to kind of take that look under the hood. And I'd say the normal time period for that's anywhere between 45 to 90 days.
Hmm.
um,
Did
it's
you
important
hire
to.
did you hire any experts to help you analyze the business once you had it under letter of intent? Of course, you had to talk to bankers and lawyers.
Sure, sure, and they are part of the process. I did the absolute vast majority of due diligence or investigation by myself, but I did rely on an accounting firm to help with some of that um, due diligence, and to look in the books back several years, just so we could make sure that what was reflected in the financials and tax returns was accurate. And that's very common. If you're taking out a loan to buy a business, it's most banks want to see that analysis has been done.
Did they do a quality of earnings uh, report for
Yeah,
this business? They
yeah.
did.
So
Okay.
we did like a limited Q of E, or quality of earnings, and um, yeah, you've got some control over how uh, in depth that analysis is. But we did a limited one, and that was more than enough to make me comfortable and my lender comfortable as well.
Yeah, we could have whole discussions on these minute details like working capital targets and
Yeah,
reps and
yeah,
warranties and non-competes and
yeah.
so forth. uh, what let me ask a tax question, okay? Because
Sure.
there are tax consequences. I don't know if you agree or disagree with what I'm about to say, but the IRS really doesn't uh, uh, care who pays the taxes. They just want you to tell them whether it's going to be the buyer or the seller that's going to pay them, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But taxes can be a big consideration in these things, and the structure of a deal can become very important to the seller because of the
Mhm.
tax implications. Did any of that kind of stuff come up in your discussions?
Yeah, it didn't for me specifically. We had to execute our transaction in one way for a specific reason, which I won't get into today. But yeah, the two general ways to execute a purchase of a business is as a stock purchase, in which you're buying the ownership. You're buying literally the stock certificates of the business,
And everything that goes
and
along
everything
with
goes
it.
with it. That's right,
The
including.
liabilities, the risk, and everything. If
That's
you're going to
right.
buy, buyers want to buy assets and sellers want to sell stock generally.
Yes. Yes, and I will say that generally most small businesses change hands in an asset sale, in which you really are just buying the assets of the business. And uh, when the business changes hands, like legally one business entity ends, and legally a new one begins, and that
Mhm.
keeps any liabilities or shoddy work, for example, in the past with the seller, and keeps the equipment
If,
and
if you're if you're
customers and
buying
whatnot.
assets, you can put the liabilities of the predecessor in a box.
Yes,
You buy the
much more
stock,
cleanly.
you can't. You're acquiring those liabilities, and consequently, your due diligence in a stock sale needs to be very detailed and precise.
It does, and certainly attorneys can help with those sorts of things. But yeah, as a buyer, for sure, the cleanest way to do it is an asset purchase. But there's negative tax
Well, I'm
implications
gonna put you on the
there
spot
for.
here.
Yeah.
A buyer can never know everything that the seller knows about a business, right?
True.
And so you're going to discover some things after you acquire the business that
Mhm.
you didn't discover in due diligence. I mean, has that been the case for you? Hopefully, nothing bad.
It's always the case. There's whether intentionally concealed or not, there's always going to be some skeletons in the closet. For folks listening who are interested in selling their business, I'd encourage them, one, to just address those skeletons in your closet before you sell your business. It's the right thing to do. It will make your business more valuable. But two, for folks who are out there maybe thinking about buying a business, you really do need to do your due diligence and look under the hood. So Yeah, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't surprised by a few things, I found after coming in, but fortunately there's nothing intentional there.
No game changer
That,
things really. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, everybody really did their best to set me and us up for success.
How did you, let me ask another question, just, and how did the seller maintain confidentiality? How many members of his team knew that this was going on? In my experience, if you're selling a business, it's
Mhm.
best not to tell your employees that you're doing it. I know that sounds terrible to the rank and file, but the reality is that the emotional roller coaster of the unknown when you're selling your business for your employees can be very disconcerting and disruptive for the business.
Yes.
How did you guys handle that?
So I was able to speak with all the key employees that I needed to, um, basically enough folks to talk to make me comfortable in what I was getting into. I, you hit the nail on the head there, and it is kind of standard practice to keep sale proceedings quiet until something is finalized, and that it may seem um, like you're hiding something, and you are, but the reality is, even if a letter of intent is signed, even if the buyer and seller love each other, like, a deal isn't done until it's done. And it's just not kind. It's not recommended to put employees through this, what could be a 6-month or multi-year emotional roller coaster.
Right.
Um,
Did
just not
you have
necessary.
any attrition of employees during the transition? I mean, whether you want to or not, you're going to change the culture of the business when you buy it, right?
Uh, yes, we didn't have any attrition, and the approach I took was, hey, I want to come in, learn as much as I can about the business.
Like the
Um,
second lieutenant learning from his NCOs, right?
that's right, and I'm still learning today. We have made changes over the last few years, but absolutely still learning today, and I think that's important. I will say, if there are any significant changes that do need to be made, it's important to make them like day one or in the first week, because employees deserve a sense of stability. So if there is going to be a big change, make it right up front, and then
You
gives
learned that
everybody some
lesson
stability.
at a young age. When I was in my late 20s, I got thrust into a situation, and you're absolutely right. If there's a decision or a change that needs to be made, go make it on the first day. Be
Hmm.
aggressive about it. You'll have everybody's attention,
Hmm.
and don't wring your hands over it.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot of government contracting work. There's a
Hmm.
concept called novation. So when you purchase a business and you have a government contract that might be very lucrative for the company you're buying, you've got a novation process, right? Did you have to go through some contract novation with the government?
So thanks to the way we executed the sale, we didn't have to go through that process. But yeah, that can be cumbersome, and it's certainly something to take in consideration during the due diligence period. And if you're not really certain about it, it's probably going to affect how a buyer values the company as well.
Is Craneworks have a veteran owned designation of some sort?
We are now. Yeah, we're a veteran-owned small business. Yes, sir.
Okay, so that gives you the opportunity to compete for those set aside type contracts then.
I wish I could say, like, we really have benefited from those types of things, but we haven't, and that's fine. I think we mainly benefit by being, which is how should companies or companies should benefit by being good at what we do, first and foremost. Maybe it helps a little bit with just in interacting with our customers that a lot of them served and I've served and familiar with bases and things like
Hmm.
that. But we're first and foremost successful because we're good at what we do, and we're always striving to do what we do better.
You mind talking about what your vision is for the future here? What's the grand strategy for Craneworks?
Well, I'd say we believe that the military specifically needs more help in the area of weight handling services, material handling services. We work on cranes with capacities ranging from 500 pounds all the way up to 500 tons that are handling things, sometimes handling research models that are worth millions of dollars, and sometimes it's an engine block that a technician is counting on to stay in the air, be placed where he needs to place it. So these cranes, what we're dealing with right now, but material handling pieces of equipment in general, have a huge safety component and times dollar component to them as well. And it takes a long time to understand how to properly maintain and repair these pieces of equipment. We've made it our sole mission in life to learn how to do this stuff really well, and therefore we're just more prepared and equipped to handle some of these situations than, say, a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps who received a 2-hour training on an overhead crane or something like that. So we see a need for our services, and we are interested in continuing to grow, and believe that's a win-win for us and the military as well.
So, the final closing question, Barker, if you could go back and talk to yourself at the beginning of this process and give yourself one nugget of advice, what might you go back and tell yourself 3 or 4 years ago, when you were getting ready to start this process?
Yeah, but it's something that I heard from some other people. But if I had the opportunity to go back and tell myself, I'd double down and tell it to myself again. And that's just particularly on the buying side of this equation. You really got to persevere, and you got to kiss a lot of frogs in order to find one that's a good fit for you personally. So. Keep working through those lows, and keep executing in a disciplined manner, and eventually the right thing will come along. And what a great, life lesson that is, remains true for what we're doing today. We try a lot of things, not all of them work, but we improve how we're going about things, and we keep, moving forward. And I'm confident with that mindset, we're going to continue to do well and create value for the world around us, and for the company too.
Barker, I remember the first time you called me when you were on this search, and I just was very impressed. You had it together. You persevered. You had a process. You worked the process, and you stayed with it. I mean, it was a marathon for you, and just congratulations on getting it done, and the best of luck to you in the future as you're continuing to run and grow the business.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Bob.
Hey, so folks, we've been listening to Barker Squire. As he said, he is a United States Marine Corps veteran, a VMI grad, Raw Virginia Mill. He is now the owner of Craneworks Inc. in Pamplin, Virginia. Thanks for sharing your story with us today. I really appreciate you stepping into the spotlight.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being on, and thanks for the opportunity.
Hey, you've been listening to the Spotlight on the Veteran Crowd Network. We're bringing together veterans and veteran-led businesses with each other and the resources that they need to prosper. Again, many thanks to Barker Squire for being our guest today. I'll throw out an Army Bravo Zulu to you, and that's a wrap.
Thank you for listening to Spotlight by Veteran Crowd. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and uploads, please visit our website at veterancrowdnetwork.com. We'll see you next time.